let me know when
Okay,
it's there.
I just started it,
Yep,
and
yep.
it should
I think.
slowly start feeding it to YouTube's server.
Yep. So
Okay.
it says we're live. So I'm just gonna go check on my phone to make sure to see that
Okay.
the I think yep it's getting video into it. So uh yep, let's wait a few minutes
Mm-hmm.
and
And I'll just start recording as well, just so we have.
so what I recommend though is that you put in view instead of I think you have it in speak you have it in gallery, but I think if you put it can we try if you put it in speaker and see how it
Speaker,
looks?
sure.
Yeah. I think that way it will change screen whenever someone's speaking.
I think it would, but I don't think it would show um, me when I speak.
Yeah, so I can see your other tab. So can you try to maximize the? Oh no, you're right. You wouldn't show you. Yeah. So
Yeah.
let's leave it in gallery. I think that is cool.
Oh wait, here. Let's try speaker view, because then it would put me small over here. 2
Yep.
minutes.
You can see the stream. Shintana here.
Awesome. Thanks, Shantanu. Shout out Shantanu.
Uh, so anyways, I'm gonna mute myself now, and whatever. If anything, I'm just gonna send you a message in the chat. Do you have
Perfect.
two screens, Jake?
Come again?
Do you have two screens, or do you have only one?
Yes.
Can you
Yes.
put the chat? Can you try to open the chat on another screen?
Yeah, I got you open, man.
Gotcha. Okay. All right.
Awesome. So we got 30 seconds. Yes. All right. All right. We'll start right about now. Um, Hi, everybody. Welcome to Bulltalk, SGA's second podcast episode here. And today we've got Professor Fontes. He is the department chair, and a professor of the business administration at BHCC. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. I, today we're gonna kind of explore some ideas about entrepreneurship and your perspectives. But first, we want to get to know you. So, can you tell us a little bit about where you got your education, where you started, and just some background history of how you ended up at BHCC?
Okay, I actually started my career just like probably most listening to this at a community college. Actually went to Massasoit.
Huh?
I wasn't a great student, and community college just seemed kind of like the default for me at the time. But I didn't have a lot of plans. I really didn't know what I was going to do. I picked business as a major just because it was the default. It was just kind of the most, I guess, broadest major that I could find. But I actually found that I liked it as I took more courses. Um, I actually found I kind of gravitated towards it. So I finished my 2 year degree, but I wanted to get out and start working. I was really kind of eager to get out and work. So once I finished the 2 year degree, I actually went out and worked. And one of my first real corporate job was at Fidelity Investments. And I was there. I started as an accounting clerk, probably as low as you can get, but it was an entry level job to get in. But um, and I gravitated to that as well. I did like the accounting function, and I want to say it was probably 4 or 5 years. I worked for a few years at Fidelity. I was promoted to the manager of the department, and then my boss came to me, and she was a great mentor. She was really a real good inspiration, a real good career advocate for me. And she said, if you want to get ahead, not only in this company but in this field, you have to go back and finish your degree. So, and I found out that my company at the time paid 100% tuition reimbursement, which is a little unusual. Nowadays, the 100% is kind of out the door. It's more of a percentage or a flat rate. But back then, I said, well, I'd be crazy not to do it. So I went back to Eastern Nazarene College for my undergraduate. And I went there primarily because at the time, they had a really good night program because I was working at Fidelity Days. And I also had another side business working cleaning offices at night. I bought a cleaning franchise. So I needed something that had a lot of flexibility so I could get the degree done, but not interfere with my day job or my night job. So I went 2 years, finished my bachelor's, and then I figured, seeing as the company is still paying, I might as well go for my master's. So I continued my master's over at Leslie, it was Leslie College at the time, Leslie University now, and that was another 2 years. And so I owe a lot to Fidelity in that I was an accounting manager, a finance manager, an operations manager, and a project manager over 12 years. So I got my Series 7 broker's license, my Series 63 mutual fund license, and 2 degrees. So I really owe a lot to that first company because they really pushed me to develop myself.
Wow, that's awesome. I think, let's back up just a second. I want to understand your time where you felt like you needed to take a break after going to community college for 2 years. What was your mindset then? Because from first thoughts, you sound like a hustler. You sound like you're great at managing your time, and you sound like you really did the most. And that can be intimidating for a lot of people. And just to think that after 2 years, that's enough, or it wasn't enough, maybe in your case, because of your great mentor that helped you figure that out. But what made you? I think looking right now, first off, looking back at everything right now, was it worth getting your master's degree? Was it worth going for that 4-year college degree?
Oh, for sure. And I think, and I will tell you, certainly for jobs within the corporation that I worked for, a bachelor's was usually a minimum requirement. But I will say, more so than that, it was more pressure I put on myself. I always was the first one into the office. I was usually the last one to leave. I worked really hard. However, I would be sitting in a conference room and I would look around, and this is myself. No one said this to me, but I would say, I'm the only one in here that doesn't have a degree. And I really felt, interpersonally, I felt at a disadvantage. I said, if I need to get up to speed with everybody else here, I have to do this. I have to get this done. But to get to your question, why I didn't continue, as I said, initially and out of high school, I wasn't a great student. So I was just kind of looking at it at the time as just a means to get me something so I could get a job. So I figured a 2-year degree would at least get me something. However, and I didn't go back for my bachelor's. I was a very untraditional student. I didn't go back to my bachelor's till I was 30 years old.
Wow.
Master's at 32. But I will tell you, for myself, and I only speak for myself, I got much more out of it. I got high honors at both colleges because when I went back when I was older, I wanted to be there as opposed to feeling I had to be there. So for me, it worked for me because, and especially because when I went back as an adult, I think I got a lot more out of it, primarily because I was working with other working adults. So a lot of the things we read, a lot of the discussions were real business stuff. It wasn't just, textbook stuff. So I think it was a little richer for me, although it was much harder, I will say, being, with a family and jobs and everything else. So it worked for me, but I don't know that I'd necessarily recommend it because it was very difficult to do.
So how about you share some tips about how you were able to balance all that? And I see that wanting and willing to go back to school is a big part of our success, right? And knowing that we want to do this and that there's beneficial factors, whether it's critically thinking and learning that perspective, or just knowing that these tools are really beneficial for our life, right? For your personal gain and satisfaction. Now, how did you get to understanding how to balance your life? Because I think as I'm currently in school, I think the hardest thing is time management, finding a schedule, realizing when to stop something, when to pick something up, when have I spent too much time in one area, and maybe it's not working, and I keep going around in this math problem or business
Yeah.
idea. So
Yeah. The main thing I had at the time, and again, as I said, I was a little bit older. I just looked at what my ultimate goal was, and I was blessed at working for Fidelity for 12 years because I saw a lot of really successful people, and that's kind of what drove me. I said, gee, if I want to be successful like them, I need to get this done. And the other thing that really pushed me was, at 30 certainly isn't that old, but I felt behind. I felt like I was, behind everybody else because I didn't finish my degree traditionally like everybody else did. So that was kind of a driver. In terms of time management, it was really, first of all, and I still do this to this day. I'm up at 4:30 to 5 a.m. every morning because
wow.
I think that window of time between 4 and say 7, you can get so much done, and that was a huge one. Time on the train. This I just took advantage. Really, I had to. I had no choice, really, of really everything I had, and really I was just really organized, specifically with a schedule. I would pencil in even a workout. I would schedule in what time I would work out, and I would just follow it. So I'm not saying it was easy. It's just, and what I typically tell my students in terms of organization and how you get things done. I explain what my system is, but what the caveat to that is, I never say my system is the best. I say my system works for me. Just make sure you have a system, whatever that is. I'm very paper based. I mean, everybody is electronic and all that kind of thing, but I still operate on a calendar book, and I have a to-do list every day, and I still do that to this day. But it may be archaic, but it works for me. And so, in terms of, again, time management, I just say have a system, whatever that is, whether it's electronic, whether it's, electronic notes, whether it's, reminders, things like that. And just work to that. But ultimately think of what that final goal is. And again, I was very, back then I was very career driven, and I wanted to get ahead. So I just was kind of full speed ahead. Let's get this thing done so I can kind of move on. And that was my mindset.
nice, that's awesome. You kind of almost sound like a little bit of like a military background with waking up at 4 a.m. and getting it done. I'm not sure if you had any experience in the military or not, but
I haven't, but I will tell you, I've admired a couple things about the military, and I wish I did, quite frankly. Is their order, their neatness, their how orderly and how together. And I've kind of used those principles. Even my shower, I take a military shower, 3 to 4 minutes and out. That's what they do in the military. So I guess I've adopted some things.
I'm sure you make your bed every morning too, right?
That's absolutely. Yeah, you better believe it.
Right. It's that idea of just completing one task already snowballs and matures into this momentum throughout the rest of the day. That that those 3 hours in the morning just fly by, but you get so much done, right?
It really is done. And I still do that at Bunker Hill. My first classes typically when we're on campus are at 7. I'm in at 5 every morning. I'm the first one, I think, at the college every morning. So,
oh my gosh, your students must love you sometimes,
Yeah, the 7 o'clock students, I'm wide awake, ready to go. I'm not sure that they're so keen on that, but
You're helping mature themselves, you know what I mean? So,
and by the way, just most students don't take a 7 o'clock class by choice. The majority, it's the other 10s at 11:30s were filled, but that's okay. They do quite well. I think once they adjust, I say give it a week, get up and be consistent, and your body will adapt for sure.
That's awesome. You're kind of like subtly pushing everyone with that 7 a.m. class because you're like, this is what's worked for me in a way, indirectly. Now, so by doing all these things so early in the morning, it seems like you're able to free up a lot of time in your afternoons and throughout your days to achieve all these other, what I like to kind of say a hustle, right? You're owning your own cleaning business while you're normally working at Fidelity and then getting your degree at night. How did that free time turn into these entrepreneur ideas and turn into you figuring out that wow, you're getting it, that you can go and start a business?
Yeah. Well, again, as I said, I started the cleaning business. The only reason I bought a franchise because they provided all the accounts, and so you just had to go clean them. In other words, I didn't have time to knock on doors and get business. So the franchise that I bought was called Janie King, and I bought it with a partner, and it was something I could do at night. So I could work during the day and do this at night. And we ran that for probably about 2 years. And it was really hard because what would happen is I would work, 7 to 5 or 6 at Fidelity, come home. Now I live on the South Shore. Um, if I had school, I'd have to go to school and then at 10 o'clock come back into Boston from 10 to about 1 or 2
Wow.
to do our accounts, because all our accounts were primarily in the city, in the Alston, Brighton, Jamaica Plain, and Boston proper. So it was a grind after a couple of years. Eventually, we hired somebody to do all of our accounts so we could more monitor them, because 2 years of doing it, when you have to leave your house in the dead of winter at 11 o'clock at night and drive back into Boston, I mean, it was a drag, but it was the money was good. It was worth it. It was a good
Mhm.
supplement at the time. But we eventually sold the business. Probably after about 2 years, we sold the franchise. But I will say it gave me a taste of operating a business and and even though it was a franchise, it was up to us to execute, every night and run our accounts and run our business with the help of the franchise, of course. But so then we got into real estate investing. We started investing in 2 and 3 families, again, here in the South Shore.
Awesome.
We get into that. And then
Why'd you pick the South Shore? Just budget wise, or was that
just where I live, just
yeah
where I live.
easy
Yeah.
to maintain because you live
Yep.
nearby?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We wanted stuff close that we could, service, and that we ended up having, I believe, 4 2 families we had.
Nice.
And we did that for a while, sold those. And then
You got in early with that market, right?
we
Compared to the
did. Yeah.
prices
Yeah.
now,
Put it
right?
this way, you talk about early, now, again, this is 20 something years ago, but the
Right.
first 2 family we bought in Brockton was $35,000 for two. People
Oh
pay
my
more for a
goodness.
car now than they do for what we were paying for a house. We put
Wow.
the down payment on a credit card and we just made the payment. So we just kind of,
Really,
made it
credit could
happen.
be used like that, right? It was enough.
Yeah. Well, with
Oh,
that, when it was that cheap,
it
sure.
was
When the house was that
yeah,
cheap,
right,
sure. Yeah. Yeah. You didn't need a traditional mortgage. You could just put
right.
it on a credit card. Imagine that.
Oh my goodness. And so you sold those properties right after holding them
We
for a
did.
couple of years there.
Yep. Yep.
And I'm just curious, why did you let it go?
Well, I had 2 partners. They kind of wanted to cash out because the market had
Mm,
appreciated. So we decided to cash out. And I had at the time been at Fidelity about 12 years, and I left to go to a company called Investors Bank and Trust, which was another mutual fund
mm,
service company. And I was there for about a year, and then I left there to go to a company called First Data Corp, which is another back office mutual fund company.
oh,
Um, but what happened was, after about 15 years in the corporate world and having had a taste of some entrepreneurship, um, it was the people, the corporate like nonsense that I used to see in some of these businesses were, for example, at one company, it was kind of the corporate culture that you had to go out after work if somebody got engaged or it was somebody's birthday and have a beer and this and that. And I never went because I was getting my degree or I was working or, doing something. And
yeah,
a
working hard.
boss of mine at Fidelity said this, and it was probably one of the most pivotal moments I think in my career. And mind you, this boss was excellent. She was more of a friend than a boss. And it came time for my review at the end of the year, and she gave me my review. That was fine. Gave me my raise and all that. And then she said, "Can I talk to you off the record?" And I said, "Sure. What's up?" And she said, "You are viewed by management as not being a team player." And that was as offensive to me as calling somebody the worst name you could think of, because I was the consummate company man. I stayed late. I'd help. I said, "Susan,
Mm,
I'd help anybody." In fact, last night I was here till 10. She goes, "No, no, no, stop. I'm not talking about work." And I said, "Well, what are you talking about then? If how can they view me as not a team player if you're not talking work?" And she said, "I'm talking when we go out after work for, Johnny's birthday or this one." And I said, "So you're telling me that I've got a great review, I just got a great raise, I'm a valued employee, yet I'm seen as not as a team player because I don't go out for beer after work?" And she looked me in the eye and she said, "Yes."
wow.
And I was furious because I told her, I said, "Susan, I go to school at night. I run a business at night." She said, "I'm just telling you." And by the way, and I don't mean
Mm,
this, it wasn't pejorative in any sense. She was trying to help me and say, if you want to get ahead, quote unquote, you have to play the game. And this is the culture here.
interesting.
And so to me, it was a real eye opener because again, I worked, everybody works hard. I thought I worked really hard. I gave my blood
16
to the
hour
company.
days, it sounded like, yeah.
A lot of work, and so I decided after that, the seed was planted that said someday I'm going to do my own thing.
Yeah.
I run my own deal. I don't want to be beholden to somebody who doesn't like my tie, or I didn't go out for beer, or I didn't do this.
Right.
Um, so it was then where I started to really think about how can I transition out of 15 years of corporate. And by the way, I was doing very well 20 years ago, making well into the six figures. I gave up a lot to do it, but it was something that I guess just I felt I had to do.
Yeah, would you say that you maybe weren't super happy with the corporate like vibe, that corporate um
Yeah,
was culture?
it was really towards the end, and it was probably my third company that my second company rather after Fidelity that it just it wasn't getting better, and honestly, it wasn't the work. I really enjoyed the work that I did. It was just a lot of the politics and some of the stuff that came with it. It just
Yeah.
wasn't for me. At that point, I kind
Yeah.
of got had enough of it. So
So
it
talking about
really
the
was.
politics there, just why? So I've taken a basic group psychology course, and I understand that socializing is a big part of building a team, right? Being able to talk to your teammates and get to know them a little bit can really drive motivation towards the rest of the team members to really participate well and execute your project together as a team. Now, why do you think that culture, the corporate culture, right, was established like this, and why do you think well, we know why it didn't really work too well for you, right? Because you're really motivated for yourself. But why do you think the corporate world's kind of in that direction of the culture, right?
Yeah,
Which is getting
yeah,
a beer after work.
yeah. And I'm not sure if that's the way it is now. Back then it's just the way it was, and it wasn't a bad thing. It just again, it just was the way it was, and you know, any company that I've worked for, I can tell, and I often tell my students this. I say, you don't really work for a company, you work for a person. And if you work for a really bad person within that company, you'll say it's a bad company. But if you work for a great person, you'll say it's a great company. I can tell you many companies I've worked at where people would say it was the worst place to work, and I can tell you, well, I had a great experience here. So
Mm,
there's a lot of variables, so I don't know what drives that. And again, some people really thrive in that kind of culture. It's just I only speak for me individually.
right.
And in one of my classes, I show two videos. One is working at Google, and one is working at Apple. And they're videos produced by these companies. And you'll notice the culture of those two companies are very different, even though they're technology
Mm,
companies. Google tends to be very loose, very casual. Bring your dog to work, free food, get a massage, go sleep in a sleeping pod, take
yeah.
a nap for a couple hours. Whereas you see the video for Apple, it's very serious there. It's very like I don't want to say competitive, but it's very like they say you have to be at the top of your game to work here. It's just you watch these 3 minute, 5 minute videos of these two companies, and you can see the culture is totally different. And
Mm,
when I ask students which one would you thrive in, it's usually a 50-50. 50% will say, gee, that seems really cool at Google to do all that stuff. And others say, no, I don't need that. I'm really more get down to business and kind of do my work. And again, it's not that people at Google don't work. It's just the culture tends to be a little bit different, and some thrive in one, some thrive in the other. So I wouldn't necessarily the company say they had bad cultures. It just, can you assimilate to it, and it does it work for you?
very nice. Good answer. Good answer. No, no, it's like understanding those two perspectives. Everyone works differently. Very important to, I think, for students to hear, and to not feel like maybe they're in a place that isn't right for them and they don't know what to do and what really works out for them while they're in
Yeah.
school and working at a corporation, thinking that one of these two is going to make the ends meet, right? And one of them
Right.
really sucks while one could be good
Right.
for them. Um,
Yeah.
Now, I want to go into your entrepreneurship and kind of learn what businesses have failed in your life and
Mhm.
what things have you learned from that, and what can I
Okay.
use today for my possible entrepreneur business. I personally buy and resell sneakers
Mhm.
with automated software, and I'm also involved with some cryptocurrencies. So
Oh,
just
nice. Very
overall
good.
in entrepreneurship, sake, did you have a team with a lot of these entrepreneurs? Like, what were some of your failures?
Okay. So how I get into it full time was I was working at a corporation, didn't, it's kind of getting I wouldn't say burnt out, that's a bad word, but just kind of wasn't enthused with what I was doing. And a childhood friend of mine he was the GM at Staples, if you know the office supply company.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't like his job. I didn't like my job. And he had known I had done some entrepreneurial stuff in the past and literally called me out of the blue and says, I have an idea for business. And he caught me at the right time because, I kind of needed a change. And so I said, well, what's up? He says, well, here at Staples, now he worked at a store in Weymouth and it was what they call an A store. So it was a very busy store. And he was the GM. He handled all aspects of the store, marketing, merchandising, operations, the whole deal. And he said, we have a copy in a print shop in the corner. And he said, but it only makes up 4% of our gross sales. In other words, 96% of Staples sales at the time came from paper, pens, and computers and all that. Mm-hmm. But he said the print area has a very high gross margin, about 40% gross margin, and it's very lucrative. They do a heck of a business, but they don't really fund it because it's only 4% of the overall store sales. So he said, when we're down people or we're short help on the floor, we don't put them in the printing shop because that's only 4% of our business. We got to put them where we make our money. So he said, it's underfunded, it's understaffed, people complain all the time. So he said, why don't we just open up down the street from them, copy their entire business model, and just compete against them? And I said,
a print shop, right? Opening up a print shop.
It was actually a copy shop, just making copies and, photocopies and that sort of thing. Yeah. And I said, okay. So I gave my 2 weeks notice. I cashed in my 401k. And for those of you who don't know what happens when you cash in a 401k before you retire, you pay about 45% interest. I wrote a check for about $40,000 to the IRS, cashed in everything, had to go home and tell my wife, by the way, I quit my job. We have no paycheck. We have no health insurance. We have no life insurance. We have no dental insurance. We have no retirement anymore. And of all things, I'm opening a copy shop. Now, if you don't think
that gamble,
if you don't think I'm a salesman, you're wrong, because I had to go home and sell that, which was not easy.
And then lay next to her that night, right?
That's right. So it was. So then you're in what I call the honeymoon stage. I gave my 2 weeks notice, and I'm not going to work for the man anymore. I'm going to do my own thing, and and everybody's like, I can't believe you're going to do that and all this, and and I got my chest pumped out and all this. And then you're looking for your location, you're doing your build out, designing your logo, and everything is great. You're telling all your friends, and it really was exciting. But I'll never forget the first week we opened. Now, when you're in the honeymoon stage, you're kind of in that, just kind of getting things done. But so we opened November 1999. We flipped on the open side. Now, what I thought was going to happen was what happens when Apple, say, comes out with a new phone or a new product, when the line is out the door overnight and all that. And my partner and I, we flipped on that open sign, and nobody came. So Monday, the first day, 8 to 6, no one showed up. Tuesday, 8 to 6, nobody. Wednesday, 8:02 a.m., our first customer walks in the door, and I'm climbing over the counter to get at him. Yes, sir, how can I help you? And he said, can I have a copy of my license? So I copied his license, hit the button, and that'll be 5 cents, sir. And I walked over to my partner with the nickel, and I said, here is our profit for the week. And I said, wait a minute, that's not profit. That is gross sales, because what has to come out of that? Mm-hmm. Light and heat and leases and rent. And then we had an open house at the end of the week. And, my parents showed up, my business partner's parents showed up, and the lady next door, the dry cleaner, heard free food. She came over, but nobody showed. It was a disaster. And if you really think about it, if you're driving down the street and you see Copy Center grand opening, that doesn't mean anything to anybody. And I look back on it and I go, boy, it was really stupid, because nobody really cares. So it was the opening, and that transition was brutal, because now it's showtime. We've liquidated everything we own and we have zero income. So it's showtime and we're not making any money.
Right. So that sounds like the worst case scenario, right? You're like putting it all in and you're betting on all this, and you're like, sometimes that's a good place to be in, right? It's a good place to almost be all in on certain things, right? For example, like my school and education, like being all in, right? From you at the age of 30 was like, I'm gonna get it this time, right? And I'm really paying attention. and it's kind of having our back against the wall that really pushes us to those
Exactly
next
what it is.
levels and really,
Yeah, I had no choice.
yeah.
This was all I had, so it had to work. So you're right.
Oh my goodness. Now, how
Yeah.
did you recover that? Did you? This is like a fail story, right? I want to make sure that.
Well, yes and no. At the
Okay.
beginning, it was. So what we did was, I had a little part-time personal training gym
Yeah. Talk
in
about that.
Braintree,
Yeah.
and my partner had one in Easton. So what we
Mm,
would do is Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I would be at the shop. My partner would go train his clients. He'd come in about noontime. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, I'd go do my clients. He'd come in. So we kind of did these part-time things, and this was literally just to keep, gas in the car, or it wasn't. It was
right.
just pocket money, but it was money that any money we were making in the business was going back to pay the light and the heat and the rent. So we weren't
Reinvesting.
making any money, but we survived. And a few times it was close. We were down to, I remember it was about $31 in the bank account, and just by chance somebody came in with an order. I mean, listen, a lot of it was luck. I'm not going to say it was through our genius and our marketing and all that, because we didn't do any marketing. Um, we were just lucky. We just stuck it out. And this, I will say though, the smart thing we did was our place looked great. It looked like a franchise. We had my business partner had a great background in merchandising, so we looked like we would know what we were doing, even though we didn't. But also, we having these little side jobs, and the fact that we liquidated the 401k, we paid off most of our debt, so we didn't have to
Right.
make this much money anymore. We could still make this much and still survive, just because we reduced our expenses. And that's one thing I would say to anybody going into a venture, is really get those expenses down, because that first year or 2 or 3 will be very lean. So you can't expect a weekly paycheck. In fact, we didn't take a dime out of that business till probably about 2.5 years into the business. So think about working as hard as you ever did every single week, and on Friday you get nothing. I mean, and that's what it was for over 2 years.
Wow. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Now, it continued to survive for a few more years after that, right?
We did. We
Yeah.
we probably got over the hump. Well, here's what happened. The business evolved very quickly, because one thing about my business partner at the time, people would come in and ask us, "Do you guys print envelopes?" He'd say yes, and he'd leave, and I go, "We don't print envelopes," and he goes, "Well, we do now," and we just figured it out. And honest to God, that's the truth. I remember
Love
somebody
that.
came in and wanted us to design a business card.
Yep.
And he said, of course, sure, come back in a couple days. We'll have a couple layouts. And I said, we don't do that. And he goes, we do now. So I went and bought a business card software program, and I became the graphic designer. And I had to figure out in 3 days before they came back. I put a little dog. There were dog walkers. I put a little dog on it. Put this. It was awful. But what happened is people were coming in and asking for letterhead and stationery and business cards and other printing things.
Hmm.
And we only made photocopies. So what we said was, we need to start thinking about these other things, because we're turning business away. So we invested in a printing press. Then we had to hire a graphic designer full time. We had to hire a full-time pressman, because you can't just learn how to run a printing press. That's like learning how to become a mechanic. It's a whole trade. So you have to hire somebody. So we really, I'd say within 2 years of opening that business, really moved from just a quick and dirty copy center to a full-blown commercial printer. And again, this is from two guys that knew nothing more than printing than you or anybody else on this call. We just had to scale up real quick and figure it out.
Yeah, you
And
took
that's
a bet
that's
on the
that's
margins, right? On the profit margins, kind of.
Yeah,
Right.
the business, I would say back then in 2000, that was probably the last time you could really get into printing, because online, and believe it or not, back then we had fax service. We would fax things for people.
Yeah,
So
I know.
online and email and all that was just really coming to bear. So, somebody today, if they said to me, I want to go into printing, I'd say, well, that industry is very mature and it's kind of declining now. So I don't know that I'd recommend it now, but I think we got in just in enough time to get in under the wire, and still make it happen. But the margins were good, and like I said, had we not, and I often stress this to my students, had we not changed our business model, kind of like Netflix has done, where there used to be DVDs by mail, now they're a whole
Right.
entertainment company. They would have gone out of business just like Blockbuster did. We would have gone out of business just like they did, had we not morphed into a commercial printer. And then 10 years later, when I sold the business to my partner, I would say 80%, 85% of our business was printing, 15% was making copies. So we would not have survived had we not evolved that business model over time.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. So it's like taking that risk, being all in, being the yes
Yeah.
man, saying, yes, I can do this. Yes, this is what my customers want. And really continue to innovate, right? Was like another huge part of that success. It didn't blow
Well,
up in the first
here
two
was
years. Yeah. Go ahead.
here was another one that happened. So we're doing our little side gym businesses as we're running the printing business, and
That you
one of my,
franchise, right? Later on.
we did. And one
Yes.
of my
Okay.
customers said to me, and I was in a two-car garage, and he said to me, and he was a very successful guy, a very good business mentor to me. He said, "Why don't you get out of this garage and make this a real one? Rent a real place and do this." So I said to my partner, again, this is about 2 years into the printing business. What do you think about this? And he says, "Well, we're in so deep now, we might as well just keep going." So we put, I put $50,000 on credit cards because my partner
Wow.
had no credit, so it had to go all in my name, and we opened our first personal training center because we had a vision for a model. We knew the business, so we kind of put a model together. And so he kind of ran the printing side, I ran the fitness side, and we kind of met in the middle. He would come help me, I'd come. And at the time, probably 2 or 3 years in, we started hiring employees. I think we had 3 or 4 at the time. So he had enough help to keep him going. I started myself, he helped me, and then we started hiring employees. So we got the first one up and running within a year. We got that profitable within a year. Then we decided to franchise these because, again, another customer of mine, Dick Bowen, who owns Honeydew Donuts,
Oh.
has 150 donut franchises, and he taught me franchising. He was one of my fitness clients, and we also did his printing. And he said, "Why don't you guys franchise these?" I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And so and just because he does donuts and I did fitness, franchising is essentially the same. Kind of the packaging is the same. It's
Okay.
just the thing in the middle might be different. But
Yeah. Yeah.
so we got somebody to buy our first unit, and then we bought a second
Uh,
one, flipped that as a franchise, and then opened a third. So that's kind of how we stumbled into that. And again, a lot of this wasn't, brilliant business planning. A lot of it was just kind of people, listening to successful business people, asking their advice, and then kind of acting upon that. That's really how we kind of get into that field as well.
Wow, wow. That's awesome. I'm just gonna pause real quick and say, open up to the audience that if you guys have any questions about Professor Fontes here, or anything about his entrepreneurship, or any questions about your entrepreneurship, feel free to ask away, and David will be directing those to me. I'm gonna continue on with you right now, Professor.
And I do have some failures too, by the way. So
Okay, okay,
those
cool.
are coming up. So
Yeah. You wanted to go with the positives first. I see that. I think one thing that you've mentioned a lot is your mentors. Your mentors, man, your mentors. How
yeah.
do we find good mentors, right? Is it spending time with your teachers, or it sounds like you found them through other clients, right? So how
Yeah.
important were mentors and how?
Yeah, teachers are always good because a lot of them, and I know particularly in the business department, we've got a lot of really seasoned people. One of our professors, Professor Roberti, has a rich history in financial service industry. So if anybody wanted to get into that, he's your guy because he had a 30-year career. He's very high up in that industry. So, but that's a start. But what I found is I would go into a business. It could be a pizza shop. It could be anything. And one thing you'll find with entrepreneurs is if you ask them, they will tell you. And I would go in, let's say I was picking up a pizza, and I would ask if, who's the owner? And, oh, that guy over there. And I'd call him over and I'd say, "Hey, my name's Tony, and I'm running a business, and, I'm not too far from here. I love your business, what you've done. What advice could you give me?" And it could be anything for, now certainly I don't need advice on how to make pizza because that's not my business, but it would be things like, financing or marketing or hiring good employees. All of that applies whether it's pizza or fitness or whatever. But what I found is if you ask people, particularly people who are self-employed, most of them had a leg up from somebody else, and they're more than willing to help you if you ask. And it was really, a lot of people were super generous with their time with me, and they were very busy and very successful people. One of my fitness clients had a technology company with 150 employees, and he gave me his HR manual to use for my business. He said, "You got to have this because this is," he told me a lot about internal policies and things like that. Now, our businesses were totally different, but they all had a human element, so that was kind of the same. So I think, in answer to that, if you ask people, they will tell, particularly entrepreneur people, because as I said, most of them had people that helped them, and they're just willing, it sounds cliche, but they're willing to give back and say, gee, somebody helped me when I first started out. And boy, they were instrumental. One of my mentors in particular, he owned a bunch of car washes and gas stations and a whole bunch of businesses. And he would be like, he was very intimidating, and he would be like going to the principal's office. Like he would say things to me like, what is your highest product's gross margin? And I'd look at him and I'd say, I don't know. And
Yeah.
he'd say, how do you not know that? This is your business. And he would like dress me down. And it was but he was right. And he was doing it kind of like an overprotective father, but he would get very direct, and he would get very insistent on, you have to know this stuff. This is your business. How do you, he says, when was the last time you went to a trade show? I've never been to one. He goes, so you know everything about your industry and you don't need to know anything more. I said, well, I didn't say that. Then why aren't you I mean, he let me have it. And, but in a good way. And he meant it well. And he was right, quite frankly. So a lot of, like I said, a lot of the people that helped me along the way were like, as I said, real generous with their time.
Yeah, they sound like sharks on Shark Tank, right? I
Yeah,
think the mainstream
exactly.
media really brings up entrepreneurs that are billionaires and millionaires, and especially that TV show. I think I'm a huge fan of that TV show, and the Australian version too, if you haven't seen that. But those guys really are getting to the punch. Sometimes they're very brutal, right? Mr. Wonderful says, "You're dead to me if you don't tell
That's
me what I
right.
want to hear," right? And it's like, that sounds like the harsh reality, right? And
Yeah.
and when it comes to that show, it feels like those sharks, Mark Cuban, Lori, and Mr. Wonderful, Ray, they're all really looking for characteristics of the people, almost, right? Would you say that you could? I mean, I think you could almost say that humans can learn almost anything, right? A person can learn anything, but it's
Sure.
about the qualities and traits of that person, right? That they're really looking for. So, what do you think are some great traits and qualities for a business owner, to someone that's trying to become a business owner? That's like, am I?
Yeah.
Do I have this?
Yeah. Yeah. Good question. Number one, hands down, is work ethic. You have to outwork them. And I know on Shark Tank, Mark Cuban has said that many times. You have to outwork
It's a
every
sport to
competitor
him.
you have, for
Yeah.
sure. Just Shark Tank, love it. I've shown that in my entrepreneurship class 100 times.
Hmm.
But a show out there I like a little better. I hate to say, but it's
Uh-huh.
called The Profit. It's on CNBC, and it's I like it a little better because if you think about Shark Tank is just about the concept of an idea they're trying to sell. It
Yes.
probably is in its infancy or first or second year. They've had some degree of sales success and they want to scale it to the next level. That's what Shark Tank.
Yep.
What the profit is, it's the host is a guy named Marcus Lemonis. He's a
Yeah.
self-made millionaire, and he takes his own money. But what I like about it is these are troubled or failing businesses, and he goes in, he assesses, he operates on three premises: people, product, and process. Are the right people running it? Is it the right product? And is the right process in place? And usually one or more of those are broken, and he'll decide whether he wants to buy into it, because these are businesses that are really on the brink of failure. What I like about the profit is because two things. One, he invests in very mainstream companies like an ice cream store, a watch company, a clothing store. It's not this real high tech stuff, but he gets really deep into the numbers. He gets into profit margin and merchandising, and he really shows the whole aspect of the business, not just the concept of the business, which is what you see on Shark Tank. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I've learned so much from watching that, because and a lot of it is simple things like one of the episodes was a pie company, and they had two locations, but one of them was not profitable and it was just used for shipping. So he closed that one, consolidate our operations to one central location, a little bit bigger. And but it really gets
Mm.
down, if you want to learn the nuts and bolts about running a business, that is the show to watch, because he gets into margins, he gets into expenses, he tears those numbers apart. And it's and some of them, quite frankly, he doesn't invest in. He'll dissect it and say, you know what, this isn't going to make it for whatever reason. And a lot of times it isn't financial. A lot of times it's the wrong person's running the business. They're
Mm.
inflexible to change. And if you think about it, they've called him to come and rescue the business, yet he gives them his advice on what to do, and they don't take
They
his
say
advice.
no.
He's like,
Yeah.
well, you don't need me then. So it's
Mm.
a real good one from a business or running a small business perspective. It's a great show.
Okay, cool. So it's like, from what I heard, is really understanding your numbers, being a great accountant of yourself, right? And accountable for yourself, being flexible and open to new ideas, and essentially not having a fixed mindset, right? Especially when you're bringing this guy in that show. But
Yeah, and when you say fixed mindset, just one footnote to that
yeah,
is I will tell you most of the good ideas that came, particularly in our printing business, came from our employees. They didn't come from us. And
yeah,
one thing I tell anybody running a business is leave your ego at the door. I said, these people that run the business every day, they do it way more than you. I didn't care where an idea came from, as long as it was. If somebody came out there, I said, let's try it. If it works, we'll implement it. But often I see managers and corporations or business owners with such big egos that if it's not their idea, it's not an idea. And one thing I can say to my credit is I would take anybody's idea if I thought it would work, because I certainly didn't have all the answers, but maybe other people did.
yeah. No, that's a great part of it. That ego is involved with business, and everyone kind of carries one. And
Right,
and
right.
from finding your mentors, you guys all came down to a level head and being like, you accepting that you don't know anything, you need someone else's help here, right? At these
Oh, for
times
sure.
of
Yeah.
serious doubt, possibly, and loss of hope. Now, you said you would find ideas from anybody.
Mm.
Now, those ideas usually come from employees. So when you're looking at hiring a new employee, what do you look for in those employees, and like how did you look for the right partners too, right? I know you hit your best
Yeah.
friends up,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
what are some of those qualities that you look for, right? Could you just start off as your employee of your next business that takes your business to a next level, right? So you
Yeah.
start searching at the ground level.
Yeah. And recognize your employees are your business. Because
Mm,
listen, Chase, if you came into my store and I waited on you,
yeah,
you'd have the best experience ever, because you'd have white glove service, you'd have service with a smile,
yeah,
I'd get it done. But how do I replicate that when I'm not there? And as the business starts to grow, you
mm,
got to hope that that person at that counter gives the same. So
service,
you
yeah,
really, and let me tell you, when we hired our first employee, and remember, we were barely at that point paying ourselves. And when you hire that first employee, that is a commitment every Friday for a paycheck and 401k and health insurance and all that. We freaked out because it was a huge step for us. The business was growing, but we had to do it. And so, again, what I looked for was really work ethic. As you said, I can train you to do anything. Our business wasn't super complicated, but you got to show up on time. You got to stay late when we got this big order. Those were kind of the things that I look for. But from an employer perspective, you have to take care of your employees. And one thing I learned from the corporate world that I couldn't necessarily do when I managed people there
yeah,
was I could do things with my employees now in my own business. Like, for example, if we had a good week at our print shop, I would go to the bank. We had 8 employees at the time. I would take $800 out, $100 bills. And
wow,
on Friday, when I passed out everybody's check, I hand them a $100 bill and say, we had a great week. Couldn't have done it without you. Go home.
wow,
And they left at noontime. And believe me, employees don't get me wrong, they like the money. But I will tell you, equally, they like the recognition of we thought of them as just, it's their business too. And it really was. And again, we had no org chart, we had no ego. You work for me, I'm the
mm,
boss. It was none of that nonsense. It was a great place to work. And I can tell you in 10 years, we had very little, if any, turnover, maybe one or two things, somebody moved away. But we made it. I said, I want to make it a good place to work, even to the point where if we had an employee party, let's say at the holiday,
mm-hmm.
we wouldn't do it after hours. We would do it on our time, like at 12 o'clock,
Oh,
because employees want to go home to their family. They've been with us 40 hours a week. They don't want to go out at 7 o'clock at night, like I didn't want to do at my former
right
job.
after working all
So
day.
I changed all that so that we do it on our time. And the other thing we did every Friday, we brought lunch in, would pass around a local menu, have
Nice.
everybody pick something, order, cost us, 50, $60, whatever it was. But
Whatever.
it was more for appreciation. And, if an employee came to me and said, my daughter is in a play today at 3 o'clock, can I leave early? Go. But guess
Mm,
what? A week later, when we get that order that's somebody's getting married and we need this done by Friday because the
yep.
wedding's on Saturday, they'll say, what do you need me to do? And what I try to impress upon students, particularly with employees, it has to work both ways. It's not just you need to do this for me because I give you a paycheck. It has to work equally. And I'll tell you, the money or the small perks or a flexible work schedule or work at home or whatever the case may be will far be outweighed by the loyalty and the work that you'll get from that employee. Most people
Mm-hmm.
don't get that, but we valued them, and I think we took care of them well. We paid probably a little more than industry rate for those jobs. And but believe me, you get it back times 10, and that is your business. And I'll tell you, that first nickel I told you we sold, that first photocopy, within 5 years, we went over $1 million in gross sales.
In
And
a
then when
year
I
or in community?
in it was in about 4 years.
4 years, 4 years,
We
nice.
went over a million in
Awesome.
4 years. And then when I sold, my partner bought me out in 2009, we did 1.6 million. And that was from zero. And that was in a very saturated industry, a very
Right.
mature industry, but it was one that we just, got
You
it
were a
right
niche. Yeah.
yeah, we did. And, even things like our delivery, we didn't hire someone to do our deliveries. Either myself or my partner drove the van and did it. People said, why are you guys wasting your time? Because you can hire somebody for $12 an hour to drop off boxes. Because our customers felt like they had a partner. I'm dealing with the owner. I would drop off and I would upsell when I'm there. Hey, Chase, by the way, how did those brochures work? I noticed you're getting low. Do you want another order? Do you want this? And I think that was one of our unique selling propositions is you don't just get the next clerk, you deal with one of the owners. And I think, and remember, most of what a print shop does is marketing for other businesses. We're printing banners and brochures and marketing material, mailers, those things. So I think they felt like they had a partner kind of in their business.
Yeah, yeah. And when you were sharing all that story and the meals, sharing meals with people, giving them bonuses, stuff like that, I really thought about my time in like the restaurant industry where it's like bringing everyone together as like family for a family meal once a day. Being able in Asian cultures, having hot pot or Korean barbecue is a big part of their ritualistic cultures, and it's sharing and breaking down food and enjoying it together that brings those connections. And then I like how you just treated everyone, it sounds like, with like they're a human being. And I think that's what every employee is looking for, right? You're worried about their nights and how they were spending their nights. And
Chase, you took the words out of my mouth. And I say to students, and it's the God's honest truth, and you just said it. I said, if you want to be the best manager, whether it's in the corporate world or in your own business, be a human being. And you will be beloved by your employees because treat them like you would be treated. It's so simple, yet, we teach a whole semester of management, but that is the ultimate rule that it comes down to is treat them like human beings and be nice. There's no reason. Listen, we had people that would screw orders up at our shop, myself included, but people know when they screw up. You don't have to rub their nose in it. You don't have to, you learn from it, you move on. I mean, it's what are you going to do? It's not. Now, let me fast forward because you had mentioned a few failures. So once we sold all the fitness businesses, because as our printing business grew, we decided we kind of got to focus on one thing. This is getting too big to kind of be doing all this stuff. So yeah, we were. So we ended up selling the fitness business. We had a trademark name and all that kind of thing. We sold all that, decided to focus on printing. And that lasted about 6 months. And we started getting itchy again and said, let's look for something else. And we looked at, believe it or not, we came close to buying a lollipop company, a very small lollipop company. It was we passed on that. We looked at a couple little restaurants, whatever, but we came across a coffee shop in downtown Boston. Believe it or not, ironically, it used to be a Honeydew Donuts many years ago. And then the franchise owner disconnected from the franchise and went independent. So it was a very small, when I say hole in the wall, it was right by downtown Crossing in Boston. And we knew nothing about the food business.
Yeah, food.
Coffee, I just drank it is about what I knew. Same with printing. But once you kind of get into that entrepreneurial spirit, you become a little less fearless to do things. And I'm saying, well, how hard can it be? Let's jump in. So we had negotiated with the owner. He was selling the shop because he bought a chain of pizza restaurants in Rhode Island, I think a 30-chain franchise. So this was a little appendage. He wanted it gone so he could go down and focus on his new business. So we tried to negotiate. We ended up buying the business. And looking back, I mean, it was a dog from day one. It was a little tiny business. And a couple things we noted. Well, right around the corner, there's Starbucks, there's a Dunkin' Donuts, there's an Au Bon Pain, there's a this, there's a, I mean, there were so many established big players in that. And it really wasn't from lack of effort. Our coffee was a Danish blend. We actually paid a lot more money for our coffee than we had to. But because we said Dunkin' Donuts coffee tends to be a little on the weaker side, Starbucks tends to be really strong. So let's go right in the middle. We know we're not going to put them out of business, but let's kind of go in the middle. we did coffee, we did muffins, we sold lottery tickets, those sorts of things. But we just found that, and we had that business for about 2 years. And I will tell you, it was a tiny, tiny little takeout window on the street and inside the
Imagine,
building.
yeah.
It was, and I never worked harder in any business. And it was, but it was probably about 2 years. And I think one of the things about being an entrepreneur is, and you look at the most successful people out there, and many of them have a laundry list of failures, like Jeff Bezos or whoever, before they hit it.
Yeah.
You have to know when to fold them. And we knew probably 6 months in that this isn't going to make it. We were breaking even at best, and we were killing ourselves driving into Boston, opening at 5 a.m. And so eventually we ended up pulling the trigger and we just sold it. We probably lost a little bit once we sold it, but you cut your losses. And what I found is this: either food is really hard or I'm really bad at it, or both, because we couldn't get that place to, and we tried I mean, we did hot dogs, we did smoothies, we did this, we would throw in anything out there, giving away free samples and marketing and this. And but it was really just it just wasn't going to happen. So and it wasn't really our thing. Food wasn't our thing. So I think that the smart part is not necessarily failing, that's not smart, but knowing that it is not going to make it and it's time to move on. Now, the person that bought from us, they've been there, I believe, ever since. I don't think it's changed hands. So, and this is probably 8 or 10 years later. So, but they kind of made it a little more involved with sandwiches and this and that. And that was way more beyond the scope of what we wanted
You
to
wanted
do.
to invest in it. Yeah.
Yeah.
You had tried all your routes and all your options that you could calculate in that business model. And you did try to execute every, idea, but it seems like the best idea was to close out, and say this was it. But it's also a fearful thought, right? To be like, I'm a failure, right? And
Oh, for sure.
and
For
that
sure.
that was the end of that idea, that you don't know if your next idea was going to be as good as your very first successful businesses, right? And
But
so
I think what cushioned that blow a little bit was the fact we did have other things going on. I think if that was my only thing, it probably would have had a bigger impact on me. But it was almost a relief, to be honest with you, because we probably shouldn't have gotten involved in it in the first place. Again, we were spread thin, and quite frankly, it was a mistake we made, and it was one that I wish we hadn't made.
Yeah, definitely. So one of the other questions from the audience, real quick, is like, what mentor did you really admire that really took his time out or her time out of the day to get you in the right direction as an entrepreneurship? Was there any one person, or was it pieces and bits from all these mentors?
It was a little of both. It was a lot of different parts, moving parts. But I would say Dick Bowen and Honeydew, and I actually had him at Bunker Hill probably 4 or 5 years ago. He came and did a talk in the auditorium. He was really good because not only did he teach me about franchising, he talked about just many things, because he started literally as one man in a donut shop by himself. He said, I get up at 3 a.m., made donuts, and I remember one day I complained to him because I was running the fitness centers, and I said, boy, Dick, we're competing with these big competitors and they're a pain in the neck. And he looked at me, he goes, are you kidding me? He said, what I spend in marketing in a month, he said, Dunkin' Donuts spends in a couple hours. He goes, that's what I'm up against. And so he taught me about, a lot of things, like how he competes against the bigger players in the market. He's local. He's a New England company. He's not a nationwide or worldwide company. So, and he does very well. He started with one and he has 150 of them. So he was really good with just kind of overall general business. And he would answer anything I'd say. I'd throw everything at him. And, if it was an employee issue, hey, I have an employee that's X, Y, or Z, and he would give me, here's what I would do. Or I had an instance where, that sort of thing. So
it's interesting
but certainly with bits and pieces too.
Yeah. It was funny how you mentioned earlier that he was the very stern one with you, right? He was
that was another gentleman.
Oh, it was a different gentleman. Oh, okay. I thought that was him. My bad.
Yeah.
Okay, so this guy was really nice, treated you like a human.
Awesome, great guy,
awesome.
great guy.
Wow.
Yeah, great
Now,
guy.
I kind of want to dive into more like current entrepreneurship. Like, what do you see the future moving into? Are you a fintech believer? Because that's kind of the business side of things. I was able to attend the MIT FinTech and Harvard FinTech meetings, and I know that may not be exactly what your background as financials, but do you think businesses nowadays revolve around technology? The next era of being a business owner is having the right technology, having a frictionless environment for your users. And where do you see this all unfolding in the next 5 years?
Yeah, the whole crypto thing, I have to tell you, I don't get it. I don't. I've had people explain it to me. It's very technical and but what's interesting is I think it's here to stay. You're hearing more now. Maybe a year ago, I wouldn't have said that because it
Right,
sounded like kind
right.
of this fringe thing. But you had the first NFL player get paid his salary in cryptocurrency and things like that.
Who
So
was that?
I forget who it was, but and they
Uh,
said it was a good move. And I don't know enough to understand it. Mr. Wonderful on Shark Tank, as you
yep.
mentioned, he is now he did not want anything to do with it. And
Nothing.
last I heard that he is starting to get involved because I think it's here to stay. So to answer your question, I would suspect um, those kind of businesses, the technology businesses, and remember, you look at the success of, say, Uber, and I often say to students, what kind of business is Uber? Uber, and everybody says a transportation company. No,
No.
they don't own a single car.
Yep.
They're not they are a technology company. They're just same with Airbnb and same with all these really successful companies. So I think it would be foolish to say that they're not here to stay and that there's not going to be more growth. I think also with this pandemic, I've heard of several businesses now that are thinking their whole. I think what it has shown is that remote work can work. I think that
Hmm.
used to be kind of the boogeyman or the outlier where, oh, Chase, if you're home, you're sitting by the pool or you're not doing your work or whatever. And I always say, if you have a good manager, they know if you're doing your work or not, whether you're
Hmm.
doing it at your desk. You can screw around as much at work at a desk as you can remotely.
Right.
But I had one of my clients. She said that they had just had a record quarter this past quarter, and
Wow.
they're 100% remote. So I think it's the pandemic is showing businesses that we can save on real estate, maybe do a hybrid where a couple days a week or whatever. I think you're going to see a lot of that. But the whole technology thing paired with that, for sure, that's not going anywhere. And that's and I tell people get on board because it's only going to get intense
It's
as
gonna
time
move
goes on.
forward, right?
It's not going to decrease. It's only going to, in my opinion, it's only going to.
Interesting. I love that. I think. Thank you, Will. Will said Panthers. OT Russell. Um, Okong will receive $13 million in Bitcoin. Insane
Yeah,
amount of
yeah,
Bitcoin.
yeah,
And
big
Bitcoin, I
deal.
think, is like kind of gonna be this new internet protocol, right? And we talked about Uber, which is awesome. And I just learned that Uber does a quasi blockchain, which
Yeah,
means that like they're all integrate, like all your devices in a Uber are interacting with each other, peer to peer, to then send that signal back to Uber, to say that, like all these users are actually together in this location driving in this Uber together. And so that's one of the technologies based behind that. And
it is pretty amazing
it
when you
is
think
really cool. And I
about
think you I like how you're accepting blockchain. I think a lot of people are afraid of blockchain, like the technology, Bitcoin, cryptos.
it. Yeah.
But what made that turnaround for you? Because you said a year ago you would not accept it.
Um, well, I
Now,
think just hearing more about it in the press, and I think, and
mm,
myself included, why people shy away from it because they don't understand it, and myself included. But I also am not that unintelligent to think that if you're hearing more about it and there's more stories and it's becoming. Listen, they just
mm,
sold digital artwork. Who would have thought of that? I mean, just went for, I don't know, 6 million or some crazy for a piece
dude,
of digital artwork. So
yes. Have you
when you
heard of
hear
Top
about
Shop?
that, I think it would be ignorant to ignore it and say, well, that's kind of stupid or that doesn't.
Yes.
It's kind of. So I've always said, well, gee, maybe it's something we need to start kind of looking into or thinking about because it doesn't seem to be going away.
Right, right. And I think the digital artwork that you spoke about, there's this new thing called Top Shot, sponsored by NBA. They actually partnered up with this blockchain company called Dapper, and what they're doing is pretty ingenuitive. They're selling clips of the most famous dunks, right, from your favorite basketball players, and they're only releasing it to a dunk of maybe a Kobe dunk would only release to like 20,000 people, right, to preserve his memories and stuff. And people are buying those packs initially for $15, right? And it's just a video clip. And they're selling it for more. And there is that supply and demand chain based off of blockchain technology that says with a public ledger, we are able to validate and go back and review all transactions between these people because it's all publicly posted, and that builds some trust with the consumer.
Yeah.
Um, and
It's fascinating. It
it
really
is.
is. Who would have thought you'd buy a clip and be able to package it and sell it? It's
Right,
nuts.
right. A digital
You
clip,
know?
and
Yeah,
it's now they're
great.
profiting, and someone else is profiting, and there becomes a whole market. An economy of finance. The finance is now hitting this
Right.
market,
That's
and I
it.
think that's
Yeah.
so interesting. That is it possible that everything could be a market, right? I mean, it
Yeah.
sounds like from collecting sports cards, collecting physical things.
Jack
You can
Dorsey's
sell.
first tweet is selling for multi millions.
Yeah,
It's
I think that's
crazy.
crazy. That is so crazy. And I think technology, yeah, is all intertwined. And I wanted to ask you, really about women in entrepreneurship, right?
Hmm.
Women in startup businesses and stuff like that. Um, can you just tell us anything about what any? Because I've heard from Mr. Wonderful over some ads or over some of his YouTube talks that women have been some of the biggest successes in his portfolio of
Yeah.
investments. And where do women stand in the business field?
Yeah. Well, there's tons of women entrepreneurs, and I
Yeah,
think, and I almost hate to just characterize it as women now because they're entrepreneurs. And you look
yeah,
at,
yeah,
Sarah Blakely of Spanx, and those people who, I always tell students, um, entrepreneurship in business doesn't know gender, it doesn't know ethnicity. You know what? The only
so
color
true.
in business is green, and I said it doesn't matter if it's a male, a female. It doesn't. A good idea is a good idea, and if it sells, nobody cares where it came from as long as it's a good idea.
Yeah,
So, I think women, I think today have vastly more resources at their hands in terms of capital and things like that, and than they say 10 or 20 years ago. But I also think they, again, in the corporate world, I was blessed. Probably the two or three best bosses that developed my business
yeah.
acumen were women bosses. They
Really?
weren't men. And
Yeah, definitely.
they did more for my career in terms of, and again, it was, and I remember how silly it was years and years ago where, and again, you're talking, say, 20 years ago, where I talked to, this friend of mine, and he's like, well, how can you work for a woman? You work, and I said, well, why I can work for a woman? Because she's a lot smarter than me, and until I'm smarter than the boss, I work for her. And but they were wonderful. They were, like I said, they coached me, they told me things to do, and so. I never really delineated between male and female because my kind of corporate upbringing was mostly with female bosses, and so I just look at a boss now, the measure of a boss. Are they a good boss or a lousy boss? I don't care who they are or what they, are they good or not? It doesn't, gender, I could care less about. But I think entrepreneurship, I had a student in my class that came up with a business idea. I thought it was phenomenal that she was a car mechanic and her business idea was to start an all female mechanic shop. And I go, well, how great is that? Talk about unique, talk about
Mm,
different, talk about like if I'm a woman, maybe I feel more comfortable going into a woman owned shop who
yes.
somebody might be able to explain to me more, conclusively what's wrong with my car or whatever. And I just thought it was a great idea. So I think now more than ever, there's more opportunity out there for minority owners, for women owners, and the numbers really support that. The numbers are huge now in terms of they're not as lopsided as they maybe were, years ago. So I think the world is their oyster. I mean, again, a good idea is a good idea. I think it's gender neutral now, quite honestly.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Professor Fontes. Thank you so much for spending this hour. I think I got to learn a lot personally about entrepreneurship, how to improve my relationships, and to apply this, this very simple idea that everyone's a human being, and we're just trying to get together and focus on our lives and have some
Yeah.
sanity while we're in it. And I
Well
got
said. Well
yeah,
said.
I got a little bit of motivation too. I always hear and think about trying to wake up at 4:30 a.m. You're not the first time I've heard someone doing this army, kind of, or military idea of waking up early, but it continues to be a pattern in my life that people that are successful are really waking up early in the morning and they're hungry for that green, that bread, whatever, that cheddar, and they are really excited every morning. And I just hope to
And I
get
have to
there.
tell you, when you're doing it for yourself, that is the motivation. It might be a little bit harder when you're doing it for some, but when you do it for yourself, it's
Yeah.
it's easy to do because you are the beneficiary of that. So
Wow. Well, I thank you so much. I think you have such a great, unique story as well. So, going back to school at the age of 30, and I'm glad I'm considering taking up some business class now, but I'm sure this would be helpful for anyone looking at BHCC to realize that you, the chairman, is such a level-headed person, and that they can come to BHCC and find mentors and find access into the real world, and hear about failures and struggles, and also see the successes. And I thank you so much for your time again.
Oh, you're welcome, and thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, awesome. All right.